Hello world, and welcome back to, or welcome to, the Pop Culture Patter podcast. I'm your host, Callum Brown, and today's episode is a personal one. I'm going to touch upon some sensitive subjects that listeners may find difficult to hear. I just wanted to give you a heads up in advance. I'm going to talk openly, honestly, and candidly about my struggle with mental health. I'll also explain what to expect from future episodes, why I'm starting a podcast, what my future plans are for the podcast, as well as provide you with a little background on myself. And before we get into it, a little word from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Brown & Co Properties, an award-winning family-run estate agency based in Whitburn, West Lothian. With a Property Mark protected service for a fixed fee, we are your go-to agent for expert property sales advice in the area. Get on the go with Brown & Co.
So, I will start with what to expect. My interests all fall under the pop culture umbrella, and I thought a podcast would be a great platform to speak about them, as well as find like-minded people to engage with by forming an online community. I love nothing more than talking about my interests, and I thought I would give my friends and family a break from hearing me go on and on about them, and look for people with similar passions or experiences to myself, and who enjoy engaging about them. My interests are mainly film, football, music, gaming, wrestling, TV, food, horror movies, mental health and fitness. So if you like any of these topics, then this is a podcast for you. I'm also interested in what my guests, and you the listeners, pop culture interests are. So please engage across our social media pages and strike up a conversation. Maybe you'll end up in a future episode one day. When I say it's a podcast tailored to my pop culture interests, I mean it's loosely based on that. I have many cool and interesting people in my life with fantastic stories to tell. We're not just tied down to my pop culture interests or my story. I plan on having deep and meaningful, real and open conversations exploring questions and themes that you don't normally come across. So I hope there's something for you. If you also want to dip in and out of certain topics, that's okay too. We will highlight in each episode what topics we cover to make it easy for you to filter out which episodes resonate with you. I want to say a huge thank you to Philip Rose for donating to our GoFundMe page at the time of recording this episode. Thanks again, Phil. Why did I start a podcast? Well, to be honest with you, after a 15-year fight with severe depression and anxiety, in March 2022, I decided I was checked out and I didn't want to be here anymore. I quit the job I was in and I was heading up the road to end my life. Luckily for me, it was a 45-minute walk home, because if I got home any sooner, who knows if I would be here today. I got home and I was so mentally exhausted that I slept for a week. Anytime that I was awake, dark plans started filling my mind with how I was going to achieve this. And something inside of me was screaming, call the doctor and go get help. So I picked up the phone and called my local doctor's practice. They brought me in right away and they wouldn't let me leave until they got a hold of the Mental Health Resource Centre. They got me an appointment and I walked straight there from the doctor's practice and sat down with a psychiatrist and a lady that was in charge of committing patients to Stobhill Hill Mental Health Hospital in Glasgow. The decision was made to enter me into care. I was driven straight to the hospital wearing only the clothes I had on that day, and I was to make plans to have a family member drop off a bag. I now had to make a call that I really didn't want to make. I was completely lost and alone. I'd pushed everyone I cared about away. I felt weak and powerless. My insides felt like buckling, and I could cry for a week, but the tears never came. I was told to isolate myself for 5 days, which in hindsight now was probably suicide watch. I'd be brought 3 meals a day at 9 a.m, 12 p.m, and 5 p.m. Nurses would pass the door every so often to check in on me, and at night they would shine a light in the room to see if I were in bed. If I wasn't visible in the room, nurses would enter and check why, which made going to the bathroom and having a shower extremely stressful, as the bathroom had no door, only 2 Western-style tavern doors that were made of foam to give you the tiniest amount of privacy. Now, this is by no means a complaint. I was there to protect my life, so it was all necessary. The first couple of nights I was wide awake with no idea how long I was going to be there for and what to expect. But day after day, I got that little bit stronger. With the help of starting a new medication, mirtazapine, rest and 3 meals a day, a combination that seems so simple but yet so effective, I was already starting to make progress. Something about this experience put everything into perspective and made me realise that simply just papering over the cracks is extremely dangerous. I decided enough is enough, and I've done my time in my mental prison. I got out of hospital and moved in with my aunt and uncle in the Perth and Kinross area for a couple of weeks in a calm and relaxing environment. I was soon feeling full of optimism about my future, and I'd made the call to move back in with my parents. One choice I ended up regretting. All the progress I made took 10 steps backwards, and a huge fallout of my parents out of frustration on both parties led me to moving back into my flat in Glasgow, leaving our relationship on the thinnest of ice. I was back to square one. I had no job, no money, no food, and I caught COVID from being at my first gig during the pandemic and was pretty ill for a couple of weeks. Something awoke within me during this time. I decided to get back to therapy and get out of the house and exercise while putting myself on a strict diet. Within a few weeks of therapy, exercise, eating well, and medication kicking in, it was all starting to fall into place. I made the decision to try one last time at moving back in with my parents and agreed that if I am to do so, I'll need to be open and honest and explain exactly what it is I'm dealing with so that they could understand. Something I'd never done up until this point. I wanted to take a year out to dedicate all my time to working on myself, and with a cocktail of one-to-one therapy where I learnt to let go of the past, cognitive behavioural therapy that taught me the skills to be more aware of my emotions and physical sensations that depression and anxiety make me feel, as well as how to cope. Physical therapy by training regular in the gym or taking long walks with our family dog Rosie. Eating well, resting, journaling, and participating in a 6-week course set up by one of my closest friends for other men who suffer from mental health. I am now feeling more alive, mentally healthy, driven, and as happy as I have in my entire life. I cannot stress to you how much this has changed my life, and I feel like a completely different person. As much as things have been more accepted and come a long way within mental health, there is still a stigma around it, especially in men. Like me, if you've ever got to the point of thinking about suicide, please reach out to the mental health services in your area. You are not alone, there is nothing that can't be fixed, and you'll be surprised at what talking to someone will do. Being open does not make you less of a man, it makes you one. No matter what your problems are, big or small, the first step is getting the help and admitting that you need it. Everything else will come organically. Anyone who has ever met me has never really gotten the real me until now. I buried my true self under many layers of bullshit and characters I built in my head to be anything but my true self. After a year of hard work on myself, I'm now the best version of me and completely and unapologetically myself. I can't wait to see how I grow over the next 5 years and then the next 5 years after that. I've rubbed people up the wrong way my whole life and burnt more bridges than I've had hot dinners, and been an extremely unlikable person to be around. And one of the reasons I made this podcast is to show you my true self. I've made many mistakes and pushed a lot of people I care about away, and I'm working hard on rebuilding those relationships. I'm not proud of the man I once was, but I'm pretty damn proud of who I've become. Off the back of the last year, I've finally found something that I'm passionate about, and after years of flirting with several things that I said I wanted to pursue, this last year has helped me filter out those that don't appeal to me and has left me with this podcast. I've never felt so sure of something being a perfect fit for me like this, and I've never been this driven to succeed at anything before. It's taken a long time for me to figure out what I want to do with my life, and now I have a purpose, a challenge, and a goal to work towards. So that leads me to what my plans are for this new venture. I plan on making this a full-time career eventually if I can, and I'm willing to make all sacrifices and put in the hard work to achieve that. I would like to grow this podcast towards becoming a channel eventually, with video content, prize giveaways, interviewing special guests, events, groups and activities for mental health sufferers, and the community created by this podcast. I'm a man of over-ambitious plans, and I've reined myself in to focus on the podcast for now, until we're ready to grow to the next level. Without you all, I cannot achieve this. So please continue to like, share, subscribe, comment and follow on as much of our content as you can across all of our social media pages. The more eyes on this podcast, the bigger and better it will be. With social media becoming a very impersonal and toxic space these days, I have no interest in selling out, being preachy, or becoming a social media influencer. I plan on staying true to myself, my beliefs, to you guys, and I promise to never get too big for my boots. I plan on sharing my channel visions with you all each step of the way so that you have an input towards the future of this project, and I look forward to seeing where it's taken. As I mentioned before, anyone who's ever met me has never met the real me. So at this stage, I wanted to give you all the chance to get to know the real me and hear my story. I was born Callum Blair Brown on Friday the 3rd of August 1990 at 9:03 p.m, weighing 9 pounds 6 ounces at St John's Hospital in Livingston, West Lothian. My parents Christine and James welcomed me into the world as their second born behind my older brother of 3 years, Christopher. The first part of my life that I can remember was growing up in a small village called Stonyburn. My parents decided to build a house from scratch on a lot that would eventually become a small neighbourhood. We were, I believe, the third house built at the time, and growing up on a building site as a playground was a kid's dream. As we were the third house built, there were no kids around, so it kind of forced me and my brother to become best friends. But by looking at us, you would think we were twins, as our parents would always dress us in matching outfits. The only distinction, apart from height, being our hair colour. I had dirty blonde hair, and my brother had really dark brown hair. In early life, my interests were Batman, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Power Rangers, and welly boots. Yes, welly boots. I wore wellies every day, in the sun, rain or snow. I wore them that much that I would get welly boot tan lines on my legs in the summer. And on my first day of school, while I wore my shirt, tie, trousers, blazer, and smart shoes, the workman building the house next door shouted, "Callum, where's your wellies?" as I passed him en route to the car on my first day. They had never seen me in anything else. From a young age, I was always pushed up in front of the adults to perform by either singing or dancing as entertainment, and I was always a happy-go-lucky little dude. It was now 1994. My mum used to take tap dancing classes as a hobby and performed in shows locally. I was taken along to one of her shows one time and watched the acts take the stage. One act caught my eye in particular. A group of young teenagers who were performing backflips over each other and other cool movements while Take That, It Only Takes a Minute was playing, a boy band I was into at the time. It was really cool to me. It felt like watching the Power Rangers in live action. I turned to my mum, not performing until later on in the show, and said, "Mum, I want to do that." Before I knew it, I was signed up to tap dancing classes. And within the first 2 minutes of class, I asked, "When do we get to do the backflips?" I was one of two boys in the class and all the girls started to laugh. The teacher laughed and replied, "Callum, that will come much later, but you have to learn the basics first." I gave it a go, knowing that one day I would be able to cartwheel and backflip my way through the school playground like a Power Ranger. I performed in shows and attended classes each week, until one day, my brother and Mr. Mackay's grandsons from across the road asked me to play football. I replied, "I can't, I've got to go to dance class." I was heavily teased and made fun of, which I remember broke my heart on the way to class. I was silent in the car, and when I got there, I couldn't get my head out of the comments made. I left the class and said to my mum, "I don't think I can do this anymore. The boys are all making fun of me." Easily swayed by others' opinions, I stopped going and started to focus on football. I still feel to this day that those classes helped me with my balance, coordination and rhythm. I've always been embarrassed to admit it to anyone, as it wasn't really the done thing for boys back then. I attended Whitdale Primary School in Whitburn, and around primary 4 or 5, I was really starting to struggle at school. My concentration wasn't great, I wasn't taking in what was being taught, I couldn't tell the time, I couldn't do my times tables, and teachers were not trained well on learning difficulties like they are now. Until one teacher picked up that I might have something called dyslexia, and I was soon sent for testing. It was confirmed I indeed had dyslexia, and I didn't really understand it or know what it meant, but I knew it made me different to the other kids, and I thought it meant that I was stupid. I think it totally knocked my confidence, and was around this time where the change in me began, and I was no longer that happy-go-lucky kid. At the same time, my eyesight started to deteriorate, and I had to start wearing glasses. At first I was only told to wear them while I was reading or seeing long distances, but I ended up relying on them far too heavily, and soon after, I couldn't see without them. Hell, I even wore them on the football field. These two things led me to believe that I was ugly and stupid, having no self-confidence and hating the way I looked. Something that would play a huge part in my life going forward. My Gran Jean and my Papa John, not to be confused with the pizza place for anybody listening, used to look after Chris and I after school until my parents would get home from work. My Gran and Papa smoked like chimneys at the time, and I always used to hate it as I would reek of smoke. But in actual fact, this is where my love of film began. My Papa would watch films constantly in his bedroom. He had one of those orthopaedic beds that tipped up at the back to make movie watching the maximum comfort. I would jump up in bed and watch films with him, and whether it was John Wayne westerns, James Cagney gangster movies, or Sean Connery Bond movies, I was hooked on film. It was here that I first got my taste of horror movies. Well, after I was over being traumatised, that is. We watched films like John Carpenter's Halloween, Friday the 13th Part 8 Jason Takes Manhattan, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Silence of the Lambs. I swear I couldn't watch a movie with Anthony Hopkins in it until I was at least 15. I was way too young to be watching movies like that, but without this experience I doubt I would love film and horror movies like I do today. He used to always refer to movies as pictures. That was a great picture, he would say. I didn't get much from my Papa, but he gave me my favourite thing about myself, my love of film. So I'll always be grateful for that. I remember watching a random football match on TV and seeing a player gracefully and effortlessly breeze through the opposition and lob the keeper. With a bald head, a unibrow, the collar up, he was not a man. He was Cantona. And from that day on, my team was Manchester United. One season in particular stuck with me, and will to any United fan that witnessed it at the time. And in the 1998-1999 season, United had done something that was never achieved again in English football. They won the treble. Winning the Premier League, the FA Cup and the Champions League all in one season. Champions League nights had always taken place midweek, and the games usually kicked off around my bedtime. My dad always used to let me watch the first half of the games before I was put to bed for school the next morning. I would always turn the volume down on my TV and stay up and watch it anyway. I remember the night we won the Champions League final. We were 1-0 down within 6 minutes, and like any other night, I was put to bed at half-time. My dad saying, "They're going to get beat anyway," as I sadly walked up the stairs. Again, I muted the TV and watched the rest of the game. The game went on, and it looked like we were down and out. The occasion getting the better of us, and not particularly playing well. 3 minutes of added time were still to go, and United get a corner. Peter Schmeichel, our goalkeeper, has come up for it in a desperate attempt for United to grab a late goal. I remember the ball dropping in the box and being a bit frantic in front of goal, and suddenly, Teddy Sheringham with a strike. Goal! I screamed, "Yes!" My dad burst in the room and shouts, "Oh, you're supposed to be in bed." "Dad, we've just scored." My dad, not seemingly being mad, came in to watch the final few minutes with me. I turned the volume up and United get another corner. Belief and hope was in the air. The moment was ours, and the ball again drops in the box. Sheringham aims a header away off goal, but it reaches a United player. And Solskjaer's won it! Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, our baby-faced assassin super sub from Norway, directs the ball into the back of the net. I've never felt euphoria like it. I was in tears and I had a sudden rush of joy that I will remember until the day I die. From around 1997 to 2000, my brother and I were big into wrestling. The WWF was at the peak of its powers and we couldn't get enough. We had VHS tapes of WrestleMania 6 where Hulk Hogan would take on the Ultimate Warrior, and WrestleMania 14 where Stone Cold Steve Austin would take on Shawn Michaels. I can remember exactly the night I was hooked, and with the world becoming more edgy, with MTV music videos, TV shows like Jackass and South Park, and musical artists like Eminem and Limp Bizkit, we were now in the Attitude Era of culture, and in wrestling. The night my brother and I got hooked on wrestling, we were staying at my Uncle Eric and Aunt Yvonne's house while my parents were out. We watched a rerun of the Bad Blood pay-per-view. They had The Undertaker go up against Shawn Michaels, our favourite wrestler at the time, in a brand new concept match called the Hell in a Cell. It was that night we saw the debut of Kane. He was pitched as The Undertaker's brother, and was this huge dude wearing a mask, which was pretty terrifying at the time. He walked down the aisle after the lights went out and flames bursting out of nowhere. He ripped the door of the cell clean off its hinges and interfered in the match to provide a tombstone to his brother in the centre of the ring. We couldn't take our eyes off, and from there, we were all in. We also had friends in the neighbourhood who shared a love for wrestling. We even started backyard wrestling ourselves, with custom-made championship belts made out of cardboard, bacon trays stolen from the kitchen to bash each other over the heads with, a ghetto blaster that played theme songs, storylines written, and 100% imagination. We put on matches and knocked lumps out of each other. We even put on ladder matches up trees and built a steel cage out of scaffolding from a nearby construction site. Some of the other kids in the neighbourhood poked fun at us, but quickly started getting involved when they found out how much fun it was. We gave it up in around the year 2000 and we decided to focus more on playing football. My love of Manchester United just grew and grew. I never missed a game. I had every strip, season rerun on VHS, magazine, and my walls were plastered with the posters of my heroes. And I soon had a new hero. His name was David Beckham. I studied his football skills and tried mimicking it on the playground, worked tirelessly on my free kicks, crossing and corner kicks. I wore the number 7 shirt, got all the crazy haircuts, and I begged my parents for the football boots he wore. Around this time there was always several football birthday parties located at Whitburn Community Centre. I would always enjoy these occasions. And one year while playing really well at a party, my friend Sean said, "You should come down to the soccer school on Sundays, we have a team, Martin's dad takes the team." I had no idea teams existed, so I asked my dad if I can go, and he said yes. I was ecstatic, so every Sunday I would go down to the soccer school, pay my £3 and play until I collapsed. The team was already entered into a league before I joined and had lost every game, and before I knew it, I was training on a Wednesday to play on the weekend. I'd never played in a team before and was used to playing cuppy with my brother, which is more a one-to-one type game. I remember Stevie O'Neill, the manager at the time, saying, "Where do you play, son?" I replied, "I'm not really sure, I've never really played in a team before, but I like scoring goals." "Right then, you'll play at right back." Right back? I'd never heard of it, but I was happy and ready to play. Flash forward to that Sunday and I played my first game against Livingston Hearts. Our strip was claret and amber, which was identical colours to Motherwell Football Club, and I can remember putting on the kit for the first time and feeling so proud. We took to the pitch on King George's Park in Whitburn and I scored a few goals from right back, and we won the first game. I say I played right back, but I never really grasped the position and played more like a right-sided forward. The boys all loved me because I helped them win their first game and I scored a few goals. They were all excited that we could hopefully kick on from this result and start winning games. I was then quickly moved to the centre-forward position. Now that was more like it. I had my friend Sean in the left wing and my other friend Martin on the right. I was their target man and I loved it. We pretty much lost every game after that, but I got on the score sheets most week, and we always beat Livingston Hearts, so it was a fixture I always looked forward to because I knew I would score 2 or 3 goals against them. It kind of made up for the losses. Well, that's what I was telling myself at least. We had all the passion in the world, but we were maybe just too young to understand the game. I then started high school and attended Whitburn Academy. High school just heightened being image conscious. I chased after a girl who wasn't interested, and the lack of interest in me from the opposite sex, paired with my friends seemingly having no bother having a new girl on their arm every other week, crushed me and fed the negative thoughts in my head. That being paired with not really fitting in within any group of friends, I began locking myself away. I stopped going out when friends asked me to do things, and they soon lost interest. It was during this time that I got big into gaming. Something that could always allow me to switch off for a few hours and relax, and something that I enjoy doing even to this day. Starting off with games like FIFA, PES, Medal of Honor and Grand Theft Auto, I would play games for hours on end and be totally immersed in them. Maybe a little too much, because I started to become more and more of a recluse and got sucked into playing in fantasy worlds rather than going out with friends and making real life experiences. I started binge eating junk food and spending far too much time locked away on my own. I dropped all forms of social activities including football and very rarely stepped out of the house. Contact lenses had become a thing and were much more affordable. I could now ditch the glasses in an attempt to try and claw back some appeal to others. Although, I did the opposite as I started growing my hair, which was an unpopular look at the time. and around the age of 13, 14, I started getting really into music. I'd always sung along to CDs in the house and in the shower, and my friend Sean once had me sing at his house while he played the drums, and his mum thought I was decent. My other friend Martin had picked up the guitar and had gotten really good fast. I watched Sean and Martin put together a band of 2 other guys from school, and they didn't seem to have a singer. They kept asking me to rehearse with them, but I wasn't confident enough and I declined. I watched them play a school talent show performing with one of the teachers singing, and it was there I thought, I could do that. Before I knew it, I was in the band. They were influenced by the likes of Jimi Hendrix, Rage Against the Machine, and Led Zeppelin, polar opposites of my taste at the time. I came in with a more Britpop-centric taste and kind of forced them to become an Oasis tribute band, basically. I was a big personality and they didn't have the heart to complain. Well, not to me anyway. I immediately started adopting a new persona, one that was so very far from who I am. And at the time, I was a huge Oasis fan, and their singer Liam Gallagher was my idol. His hair, his swagger, his foul mouth, his attitude, and his clothing all spoke to me. I did a deep dive on him like I did back in the David Beckham days, and I transformed into Liam with what I can only describe as method acting. I found it far too easy to be anything or anyone but myself. It was easy faking confidence and arrogance. I thought, nobody likes the real me, so I'll just be someone else from now on. And people could tell a mile off that I wasn't being myself, and I quickly became the laughingstock of those around, and it just pushed people even further away. The band had played a few school talent shows which seemed to be received well by audiences, although there was friction brewing, and then in the end it didn't work out. I had got the music bug and began expanding my tastes by just simply listening to the bands that influenced the bands that I liked, and it sucked me down a rabbit hole. iPods were the new fancy gadget, and my cousin Mark, one Christmas, decided to open my mind musically by downloading his extensive music library onto it. Mark at the time worked for FOP Records and was always up to date with musical tastes, as well as being a huge fan of artists from the past. I was introduced to artists like Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and the Smiths. The persona that I created led me to not paying attention at school. I didn't do one drop of homework, I didn't study for exams, I was rude to teachers, and I was a regular for bunking off school. I thought my friends and those around were doing the same, but in actual fact, they all got much better grades, so I guess they stuck in and only appeared uninterested. It was around this time that I met an important person in not only my brother's life, but my own. Christopher had started seeing a girl from school called Laura, and I first met Laura when I came off stage performing at one of the school talent shows. She told me the band were great, so I immediately took to her. Laura quickly became the sister I never had, and has been there for me since day one, as well as being the only one able to tell me when I've pushed things too far. Something I've always appreciated. Laura, you're the first truly special person that I've met outside of my family. Thank you very much for everything, and I'll forever be in your debt. Also during this time, my family decided to get our first dog. A chocolate Labrador with a beautiful soul called Max. We'd never really had pets before, but Max became much more than a pet. He became family, and my best friend. My parents finally caved, and after months of their best friend Fiona O'Neill pestering them to get a dog, they brought home the sweetest little brown puppy. I was so nervous because we'd never grown up around dogs, and the only experience I had was with the O'Neills' 2 boxers, Coco and Cooper, which was a positive one, but I never had one there every minute of the day. My mum brought Max wrapped up in a towel into the living room, and he was shaking with fear. He was very shy but curious. He hid behind the coffee table that dwarfed him, and would peek his head round at my brother and I sitting on the sofa, and would take a step to come investigate, and then instantly change his mind and go backwards. We moved through to the floor in the kitchen to be more approachable, and he came in and started to climb all over us, and from there, we were in love. The first couple of nights were rough for Max, pining for his left-behind family each night from the cage. My parents did everything from leaving towels with our scent on them to sleeping down with him to comfort him. He quickly outgrew the shyness and became a wild puppy that would whip around the room in excitement within seconds of sudden bursts of energy, doing wheelies. Max was such a good-natured, loving, relaxed and clever dog. He would always come in to hang out with you and see what you were up to. I always had this sense that he knew exactly how people were feeling, because if you were mad, he would stay out of the way, and if you were sad, he would come up beside you and nudge your arm for a cuddle. I miss you with all my heart. I love you. Myself and my friend Martin had started drinking alcohol. It didn't seem to agree with me, and it always brung out that vulnerable kid that I buried so deep in creating personas. I wasn't a happy drunk, and would often be found in tears at the end of the night feeling low, which didn't do me any favours as it made everyone around me feel uncomfortable. I couldn't wait to leave school, and I was always too keen to grow up before my time. I looked at adults and I thought, they drink, they make money, they have sex, they travel, they do what they want. That's what I want. And my time finally came to leave school in my 4th year. I started working with my dad when I left school for a local mortgage practice as an office junior, which is basically a glorified T-boy. School friends who stayed on at school would pass the shop window and see me working, and it made me feel like I was an adult. Couldn't be further from the truth though. On a family holiday to Portugal, I met a girl from Glasgow and struck up my first serious relationship. During this time, my dad decided to go out on his own and start his own mortgage practice, meaning I had to find work because he didn't have the income to hire another person. My then partner had an interview with a high street clothing brand called River Island. She said to me, "Why don't you come along to the interview? See if you can get into." At the time, I wasn't putting in any effort to find a job, to everyone around me's frustration. It was a group interview, and I took the chance, and it luckily paid off. I got the job, and she didn't. One of the interview tasks was to pick a celebrity's name out of a hat and dress them using the clothing in the shop. I got Justin Timberlake. I dashed around the shop, suit, shirt, tie, shoes, jewellery, and picked up a pair of wacky boxers to go with it. We had to describe to the group why we chose what we did, and I explained, Justin Timberlake's always dressed smart in suits and wears bling. And I picked up these pants because it was for the ladies when he was undressing. This instantly made me over within the group, and the 2 employees who were interviewing me said they hired me off the back of that. It was at River Island that I met one of my closest friends, Jamie Scott. Jamie was brought in as a Christmas temp, and at 6'2" myself, I didn't really come across many people that towered over me, but this guy did. His humour, his West Coast accent, his personality, and the fact he was a Manchester United fan made him instantly over with me. Jamie was like nobody I've ever met before, and has always got behind me in every direction that I've wanted to go in life, and we remain closer than ever to this day. Through Jamie, he introduced me to 2 friends, and Andy and Joe, that I speak to probably every day. Looking back on it now, working in retail worked wonders for my development as a person. The personas seemed to disappear. I'd left the small town that I'd outgrew, the friends who'd lost touch and moved on. The world now felt like my oyster. And after spending a few years in retail, I quickly learned I wasn't actually making good money, and I started to look for a job with more of a financial benefit. Crazy now thinking back that I had some of the best times in my life on minimum wage. There's definitely something in that message. Upon leaving River Island, I worked in call centres for the Student Loans Company, Santander and Barclays Wealth, where I met some pretty amazing people along the way. I then went on to work within a Scottish audio technologies company called RHA. They designed and engineered their own headphones in Glasgow and sold the headphones all over the world. It was at RHA that I found a job I was happy to spend the rest of my life in, and one that changed my whole outlook on work. They were the first company to ever believe in me by handing me the reins of the customer service department, a role that I took a little too seriously at times, and ultimately one I could have handled better. I was proud to work for the company and watch it grow from a small start-up to a recognised brand within the industry, over just 7 and a bit years of service. Sadly, during COVID, the business was struggling and had to start laying people off. I hung on for as long as I could, but sadly, it wasn't to be. I was laid off and my world was shattered. I went through the motions and found it pretty difficult, if I'm being honest. Every job taken after that never lived up to how invested I was in RHA, and I was pretty mad at the world for taking that away from me. I saw the company support me with my mental health struggles on more than a few occasions, and I'll always be appreciative of that. The CEO, Andrew Reid, was always heavily invested in my development as a person, and it's a relationship I'll never forget. Andrew, if you ever listen to this, thank you. I moved on to take a 6-month contract building a customer service department for a company called The Paint Shed, and what became a pretty shitty experience. I was missold a role that was pitched to me at interview stage and had a toxic micromanaging manager who pretty much bullied me out the door, as well as other long-standing employees. I left The Paint Shed after completing the 6-month contract with my head held high, knowing I did the job I set out to do, and I moved on to work for a company called Alliance Disposables. Alliance always treated me well and with respect, which was a welcome change from the paint shed. They'd been expanding the business off the back of a successful year, and they'd brought me in to be a stock control team leader, but were hesitant to hand me the reins right away due to my lack of experience in stock control and the fear of rubbing a certain staff member the wrong way. They stuck by their word and rolled out the change within a couple of months. In terms of timing, it couldn't have been much worse for me, as I was losing my battle with my mental health and I was about to check out. And with that all being said, you are now up to date with my story. I hope that you're still awake and that my story or my voice didn't bore you. I left out speaking about relationships and a little more about my mental health struggles because I plan to talk about those in future episodes. But in terms of my story, once you've listened today, we won't be going into it further unless an episode takes us that way. I just wanted to give you all some background on me as a person. Next week, we'll get back to having a guest on each week going forward, so please stay tuned. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.